traditionnel, hein? Allons faire quelque chose de traditionnel. En fait, allons faire comme... Ouais, les flammes d'enfer, ça va être bien. They got all these songs we're singing here, this is all songs that I wrote, but to give you a little idea, you need to have a little backstory. Cajun music, everything that we play. Y'all know us Cajun people? Y'all even know that we exist? Or you think it's just like a seasoning of chips? Or like bad restaurant interpretations of our food, that they ruin everything and try and pass it off as that? Cajun does not equal blackened, and it does not equal pepper. We are an entire people. It is an ethnicity. So our people arrived in Acadie, which is now Maritime Canada. That was the first and lasting settlement in the New World, compared to places like Jamestown or whatever that ended up, bombing out. And a big part of that was because French people showed up and they said, oh, look at all these weird people that I've never seen. They seem to know how to survive on this land. We should probably make friends. And contrast, in the US, they showed up and said, look at all these weird people I've never seen. We should probably shoot them. So because of that, things worked out a little bit better in Canada. And if you look at it historically, what happened is these communities started to thrive, and they started to raise cattle and sheep and everything else, wheat. And they did very well. And colonies like Boston and them were really struggling and kind of starving in the wintertime. Because back in those days, like, wintertime was the hardest thing to get through, right? So what was happening is Maritime Canada, Acadie, was selling their surplus, because they had a surplus of goods every winter, because their colony was doing great. So they were selling it down to the colonies for a nice margin. So the British Crown decided, oh, it must be better land to farm further north. Which, if you know anything about farming, that's the most absurd thing anybody could say. So they went to war with France for the territory, but at that time, our families had been in Acadie for roughly 150 years. So I don't know how many of you, where your families come from originally. I don't know if you're German or Polish or English or whatever you got going on. Clearly Northwest Europe. But whatever y'all got going on there, y'all have been here at least maybe 150 years, maybe less. But good chance is that most of you consider yourselves Americans. You do not consider yourself whatever your root ethnicity is. And same thing with the people in Acadie. They no longer consider themselves French. They just consider themselves Acadians. So when England went to war with France, they were just trying to be like, hey man, I'm really not part of this, because we are a whole own thing. And because of that, they stayed neutral. They ended up, a lot of the families got captured once the British won. The British ended up beating the French. So they would call all the people to the church, and they would say, hey, we're gonna get all the men from town to come to church on Sunday, and we're gonna talk about it, we're gonna get this figured out. And then they would get to church, and then when all the men would get there, they would chain the door shut and have some little soldiers jump out the woods, And from there, you could take the women and children and do how you wanted with them. And you would either burn the church or kill the men, or take them and send them off on a different slave ship to God knows where. And they did that. They took their slave ships from down the little triangle, and they started sending them up, and they loaded people up, and they exiled our people. And so from that point, they became refugees, no different than refugees today. But unfortunately, not much has changed in America in the last 250 years. So when they would arrive along the East Coast, they were like, we really don't need some random refugees coming on our land. So they were not welcome anywhere. So they ended up putting a bunch of our families either in jails in Saint-Domingue, which is modern-day Dominican Republic, or if they didn't do that, they either got shipped back to France, or they had to come to New France, which is the whole middle part of the U.S. It was about a third of the U.S. at the time. But in those years, it was actually owned by Spain. I don't know if y'all realize that, the whole middle third of the U.S. It's a really interesting thing that they probably don't teach y'all in school, and it's really important because it's American history, you know what I mean? Like, maybe like, rewrite a damn book, So the Spanish looked at it, and the Spanish was having a hard time going west of New Orleans.